Hi, Merry Christmas, especially to closeted men and fujoshis. Cheers. Clink. My name is Phoebe Cakes. Welcome to my channel. You're watching In My Crumble Opinion, where I share my opinions. And today, I'm going to give you all my opinions on Heated Rivalry. I think there's a lot of discourse happening in the blogosphere. Do we use the term blogosphere anymore? A lot of people are having feelings, a lot of hot takes and crash outs related to Heated Rivalry. Jordan Firstman, I'm looking at you. And I'm here to set the record straight. And we're going to dissect whether Heated Rivalry is well written or not well written. Cue intro. So I just want to say off the bat, a lot of people will look at Heated Rivalry and think, oh, this is like smut. Or this is like gay Hallmark movie bullshit. Or that it's like inconsequential or unsubstantial. Or just like, clickbait or whatever people will use to demean the show. I am of the camp that thinks Heated Rivalry is high art, high literature, and should probably win all the Pulitzer Prizes that they can give, Rachel Reed, the bi woman that wrote this masterpiece and is now adapted by Jacob Tierney. I knew it was a J name. Really put their whole pussies into this, and I think it's a really, really good show. By the end of this video, my goal is to convince you that Heated Rivalry is not the frivolous TV fluff that a lot of people are making it out to be, and that there's actually some really deep, serious, substantial art being made by this show. I'm not gonna be, too extemporaneous about it, or no, I will be extemporaneous about it, let's be honest. But I'm gonna put a little bit of structure. These are the things that I think make television writing great, television writing good. And I'm gonna break it down in certain categories, and each category you're gonna see that Heated Rivalry kind of ticks all the boxes, okay? The rubric and scaffolding that I have for this is going to be engine, coherence, consequentiality, write that down, literary value, novelty. Boom, 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 boom. Is that 5?
That's 5.
Oh, bitch. It's a 5er. So, engine. You can think of engine as the thing that kind of keeps the show running. If you think of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the monster of the week is the engine of the show. Procedurals, the solving of a crime is the engine of the show. In Survivor, doing the tasks and then voting somebody off the island is the engine of the show. You're with me, right? So what is the engine of Heated Rivalry? Why do we keep coming back to it? What is familiar about it? And what keeps the story going? It's this high arousal state that we're perpetually in that's constantly being subverted by Ilya and Shane's self-limitingness, repression, as it were. And that's very intriguing, because at the... there are points in the episode in which, we we do get to see them get together. And it's just that perpetual, push and pull of their dynamic. The competition, the rivalry, but the desire for each other. That contraction and expansion, contraction, expansion. And the way that we move through time. Baby, this show has engine, okay? It has my engine running. Hop on board. Come on. Yes! Giddy up, Jingle Horse. That's what I'm talking about. So, engine, tick, coherence. Coherence is kind of broad, but coherence is narrative and character development that's convincing, consistent, and compelling. 3 C's, bitch. That's what I'm talking about. And cunt. Actually, 4 C's. So, in terms of narrative structure, I think there's a lot that the show has going for it. We have a very clear kind of consistent idea of how these boys' lives are mapped out. In terms of character consistency, it's just we also have a very clear sense of what drives Shane and what drives Ilya, even if their motivations are mysterious to each other and mysterious to themselves. And just a lot of the scenes and a lot of the way in which the story unfolds, I think is really elegantly done and very consistent. I think there's like shows on TV right now that deal with like similar subject matter, Boots, and it's just like, who are these people? Why are they always so mean to each other? And like, why is that guy so pathetic? It's just like, I'm constantly like posed questions that I actually don't have any interest in like learning the answers to. And I think that comes down to like the characters not being like very clearly drawn or rendered well. And I think there's just like a lot of like interest and consistency in the which, Shane and Ilya are rendered for this show. It really takes you out of a television show when characters are set up to have particular behaviors and like ways of thinking and moving through the world that they've built, and they violate that. And not in an authentic way in which like somebody does something surprising, but in a way that's just like they're doing something that's incongruous with what we've been taught to know about this character. And I think what Heated Rivalry does really, really well is that it sets up these characters whose paths through life are very clearly drawn, and they have very clear motivations, even if the things that they're doing are kind of surprising to themselves. So, ticks that box. Are you following me? I don't know, this Paloma's hitting. Okay, Angel and I are editing this video right now, and it comes to our attention that I totally skipped over one of the categories I was going to talk about in the video, and that one was consequentiality. So consequentiality to me is something significant that the show will contribute to society as a whole or culture as a whole, and so it's long-lasting cultural impact. And a lot of that is to be seen, obviously, but again, a example that I keep pulling from, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Joss Whedon Boo, but what Joss Whedon did, or what Buffy did, is really recontextualize femininity and heroism and the final girl, and there's a lot that the show did to also revolutionize television itself. So in what ways is Heated Rivalry going to contribute to society as a whole is maybe to be seen, but it is the #1 show on HBO right now. It's obviously very divisive, so people want to talk about it. It's kind of a water cooler show, but the themes that it's dealing with are also pretty substantial. It's a sports show that's also like a sexual drama, but it also centers around, masculine or masculinity culture. And I think it's just like doing a lot of really cool, interesting things, and those themes of like closetedness and yearning and wanting, I think are also really expertly rendered through the show's writing. And that's all I have to say about Consequentiality. I just think it's a show that's obviously changing how we're looking at television and gay drama right now. So, Consequentiality. Tick! Thank you. Okay, literary value. Now, literary value, I'm using to encompass also like cinematic value, the way that the show looks. I just want to say like the show looks so good. There's some like deep contrast, and they do a lot of like really interesting things with the camera in that it both uses the female gaze and the male gaze simultaneously to help tell this story. These are two things that are often misunderstood in media literacy, or when people talk about, things. So I'll break it down. The male gaze, read Visual Pleasure by Laura Mulvey. She breaks it down really clearly, if not like kind of like pedantically, like with, academic speech and whatnot. The male gaze is looking at a subject and objectifying it. Sometimes that means like disarticulating the subject, zooming in on body parts, removing the humanness and individuality and wholeness of the character for the consumption of the viewer. And typically that happens when we're looking at women. When women are depicted in film, they're almost always like boobs, ass, not so much as whole human beings, but like bits and pieces for the viewer's pleasure. So in Heated Rivalry, we kind of subvert that a little bit by looking at male bodies, and I think that's kind of like rich and refreshing and interesting. There's a lot of layers of like how we're perceiving this story and how we're perceiving the bodies of this story. And it's like part of it is objectification. But another layer in which the film also plays with the gaze is that we see the female gaze. And you might be asking yourself, Phoebe, what's the female gaze? Please tell me. Well, the female gaze is actually a newer term that reflects the camera and narrative focus on interiority and emotions, and being able to see the fullness of characters that aren't wholly corporeal or related to the body. So in Heated Rivalry, we actually get a really clear sense of interiority by the way the actors, masterfully kind of play the subtext of a scene. The way they look at their phones and communicate to each other through text. We'll get to that too. We're getting a lot of female gaze on top of the male gaze, and I think being able to oscillate through those two modes is something that the show does super fucking well, and that we don't really get a lot of in other types of media. Also related to like literary value is this idea of like catharsis. We get a sense of release intermittently throughout the show when they do get together. There's just so much denial and so much repression that's continually displayed that we are also being withheld, also being kind of kept from. And then when they do meet each other, when they do connect, it's this like super cathartic moment. And that happens periodically, and it's not only sexual, which is like the surprising part, because like honestly, I am rubbing myself crazy style to the show. Shout out to the Fujoshis, but it's like there's also just like this like pathos and emotional connection that they also rupture into sometimes, Ilya and Shane, and that's also really beautiful to witness. So there's catharsis. I could go on and on, but I think the show's doing a lot of really good things. It just like looks really good, It's just again, there's like this like way of shooting things these days that just looks so Netflixy, like just so Netflixy. It's just like over illuminated, desaturated, no contrast, very clean, competently composed, but there's just like a certain level of like too pretty, like me, like too pretty. And the show really does a good job of like just like kind of making the guys look ugly sometimes. I mean, like they kind of look haggard and like angular, and because they're like ugly boy athletes, and they get like sweaty and gross, and they get sad, and they get like messy, and it's really nice to see not only the way in which that they're styled and shot, but also just like there's a richness and a tactility, a realness to the way that the show is shot. I really appreciate that. So, literary value, cinematic value, bitch, the show has it. Let's move on. Novelty. I think this show is doing a lot of really cool, different things. In a certain way, it is the spiritual successor to something like Brokeback Mountain. Also from the page, brought to the camera, originally written by a woman, Pulitzer Prize winning Annie Proulx. Annie Proulx. And deals with similar themes of like repression and closetedness and yearning and wanting to connect. But I really do feel like this show is participating in that dialogue and adding a lot to it. A lot of times, like, we look at these closeted stories or coming out stories, and they're happening in this like rural place, outside of time or a bygone era. It's just like it's the Wild West, or it's in God's old country. It's the Scottish Highlands. I don't know where that took place. It was like on a fucking UK farm, like whatever. We're given this sense, it's like, oh, internalized homophobia exists in these places because they're so backward. They're so far away from like the city or modernity, or they're far away from like the liberal contemporary moment that we're in, and they just don't have access to it, and it's so sad. And here we're seeing that internalized homophobia, the drive to be closeted, can persist in like dominant contemporary, very public culture. Like these boys are not in like some like random small town, like they're in like big cities, Montreal, New York, Sochi, Los Angeles. Like they're around other gay people, they see gay people exist, yet there's so many things in their lives that bar them from fully expressing themselves and being able to connect. And I think that's a real interesting thing that we don't necessarily always get to see, and I think it's very powerful to have that type of representation. So there's some novelty there. Another way in which the show is like novel is the way that it plays with time. I think of Foundation and how one of the core characters of that show is time, and that there's this deep, galactic time scale that show is existing in. And likewise, there's this like deep homosexual time that these boys are living in, and just like we go eons before they can like connect and reconnect, and they disconnect, and there's a rich kind of like history of like yearning. And I think the way in which the show plays with time is also very novel, and I think that's cool. What else is novel about the show? We hear a lot of like second screen viewings. It's just like a lot of shows are made to be watched while you're looking at your phone. And I don't know if you knew this, but that's like really fucked up. We live in a fucked up world where like I do it all the time. It's like I do watch shows like specifically to like look at my phone. So I'm guilty of that. But this show, there's something about this show that denies you the opportunity to disengage. Like, this is not a show in which you could like look at your phone simultaneously. Yes, it's very enrapturing, like looking at these like beautiful, sexy bodies is drawing you in. Part of that engrossment and detachment from your personal device is because the guys are so sexy, sure. But I think it also employs certain elements that really make you have to pay attention. The moving through time and having like title cards tell you where you are in space and in time, like makes you have to look at the TV. You can't just like tune out, or else you'll not realize like years have gone by. The other thing is that I think there's a lot of poor usage of texting that happens in media these days, either in TV and film, where like people are texting each other and it's just like this vehicle for exposition, as opposed to like something that's like integral to the movement of the plot or the story, or a deeper understanding of like the characters and how they interact. But I think Heated Rivalry does a really good way of like utilizing text to convey interiority, which we've already kind of talked about. The end of episode 2 like really got me, when Shane is like, we didn't even kiss, and he typed that out, and then he didn't send it, he just like deleted it, and like, bitch, that like killed me. Like, I think the show is doing something very interesting and new with that. Oh, I mean, like, in terms of novelty, episode 3 was like almost a bottle episode. Episode 3 was like a departure because we weren't looking at the two main characters that I've been talking about and the show, is mostly preoccupied with, and we get to learn about Scott. Scott Hunter? That's right. Yeah, oh my god. Scott, oh my baby, my closeted baby. I love him so much. The thing is that like, a show being able to divert the narrative and focus on entirely new people and still deliver the same feelings and interests that the previous 2 episodes were able to do, the first 2 episodes are able to do, I think is also just like a mark of like really good writing. If you're new to the channel, one thing you should know about me is that I love irony. And I love the irony that like Shane is a character that's, part Asian, very Asian presenting. And he understands like the importance of that type of representation. Like being an Asian male in sports and professional sports is important to, the world and how other Asian people feel about themselves. Like being able to be seen in that type of arena. And the irony that he's also queer, but that part of identity isn't being represented and isn't being celebrated. And there's no drive for him to hold up that mantle of being visible in that aspect of his identity. And to a lesser extent, Ilya is also, an immigrant, and he has, similar responsibilities to be visible and to be excellent. It's really great that the show understands the nuances of identity, and that we get to see how identities can be in conflict with one another. That being Asian doesn't necessarily mean that you get to be, visibly queer at the same time, especially given the context in which you're existing within. So, or like being an immigrant, doesn't permit you to be queer, especially if like you come from a culture perhaps that is, homophobic. So there's just like a lot of really interesting things about identity and representation that's also going on in the show. Oh my gosh, what else do I have to say? Is there anything else I have to say? Okay, bitch buckling. This is the part in which like I stop stroking my hair and start stroking my brain. Okay, this is gonna get very gray matter. Gay matter, gray matter. We're gonna talk about psychoanalysis for a little bit. Particularly, I think of like Lacan in respect to this show. A lot of the criticism of the show is that like there's really bad writing. And I actually think like the writing's very good. Dialogue is what I'm focusing in on. The dialogue is very stilted and very awkward sometimes and very flat. They say fuck you to each other all the time. And the reason I think about Lacan is because Reader's Digest version, Lacan's idea of the symbolic order, yada yada yada, object petit a, or whatever, like you could look it up. Repression is a feature of language because language will always fail to articulate the real. So we're always repressing that which is real. And that with repression, desire persists because that's just how repression works. And so desire is, if we're thinking transitively, a feature of language's failure. And what more failure of language is there than the way in which straight men talk to each other? I'm sorry. It's just like, it's big galaxy brain, the thing that this show is doing. It's just like, yeah, it's their constant failure to communicating, and that surface level way in which, straight men communicate to each other, or repressed men would communicate to each other, is what we're chewing on here, and it is part of the story of repression and the story of self-denial and the inability to articulate and attain things that we're immersed in. And it's like scientifically documented by linguists, that like straight men do not communicate well.
On average, straight men have much more centralized vowel sounds than women and gay men, who have much more peripheral vowel sounds, which are heard as more expressive. This is a robust, extensively documented phenomenon.
You have to keep in your mind enunciating is gay. Enunciating is gay.
So, go read some Lacan, but this show's big brain. I don't know what to tell you. Oh my god. Okay, lastly, and this isn't related to any of my rubric or anything about great shows or whatever, but I think the show also does a really interesting thing of like looking at how competition exists like within gay men and gay men culture. Like, I don't know if you ever had a boyfriend, but it's just like, it's like, you kind of compete with each other, it's like, I want to be hot, or I'm going to sleep with more people that I don't know. It's very toxic, Jordan Firstman. But the show kind of literalizes some of that innate aspect of like male relationality. There is something inherent in which there's always a competitive aspect to like male relationships, whether they're gay or not. Boys will compete with each other, boyfriends will compete with each other. It's like a facet of being male and existing within patriarchy and being male. But there's also something kind of like entwined and entangled about sexual desire and competitiveness. And the show poses the question is like, are Shane and Ilya horny for each other because they're rivals? Or are they rivals because they want to fuck each other? And that question is like the center of the show, in a sense, at least the vibe. But it's also like a valence that's draped over all boys and all men, It's like, I mean, is sports really just like a manifestation of all these boys wanting to fuck each other? Maybe. The show is like a fractal of interesting things about patriarchy and sexuality and relating to each other. And like the more you zoom in, the more you see that it's the same. The more you zoom out, you know, the more you see it's the same. It's just like, it's like very fascinating. I think that's all I have to say about that. I guess before I drop out, I do want to address some of the hot takes. So one thing that I want to address is like the fujoshi of it all. The hot take is that women are co-opting queerness and queer sexuality for self-pleasure, and that there's something inherently wrong and violating about that to queer people, specifically queer men. And there's this Japanese term called fujoshi that specifically speaks to this, usually in respect to like anime or whatever, or like mangas. And it translates to like rotted woman. I had to like look that up. I was like, what does fujoshi mean? Rotted woman. Oh my god. You know, I'm a rotten woman. Let's just put that out there, okay? I think like women can honestly rub themselves crazy style to whatever the fuck they want because they earned it. And I don't think that it's devaluing, you know, my queerness to know that women can appreciate on a sexual level queer love. I think that's actually kind of like interesting and has nothing to do with me, honestly.
Why do you guys watch gay man porn?
Well, sweetie, you know, human sexuality is complicated, and sometimes desire can be, you know, counterintuitive. You know, for example, because women's sexual responsiveness is internalized. Sometimes it's exciting for us to see responsiveness externalized, like with a penis.
Wouldn't you guys just rather watch girls doing it, though?
Well, you would think that. But usually in these movies, they hire two straight women to pretend, and the inauthenticity is just
Whoa, that's
unbearable.
enough.
The other aspect of it is that like women shouldn't be telling stories about queerness. If that were true, like we wouldn't have fucking Brokeback Mountain. Like I said before, like Anne Proulx like won the Pulitzer for that. I think there's something about like women writers that really can provide a fresh lens and a authentic and necessary lens to interiority and yearning and desire and love that I think is welcome in the literary and cinematic and television world. No, there's a time and place in which like we shouldn't permit certain people to tell certain stories. Like I think there is instances in which like, yeah, no, you can sit down. But I do not think like gay sexuality, the themes of like yearning and fully rendering a character or two characters in this manner, you know, is one of them. You know, Rachel Reed, I love you, gal. We're sisters. The other hot take that I saw, and I've kind of name dropped Jordan Firstman, you know, a lot, and people have already like taken him down.
The comments made by Jordan Firstman about Heated Rivalry bother me on like a molecular level.
But it's like the idea that like this isn't real gay sex or this is how gay men have sex. It's just like, you know, and I think a lot of people have already like said it, even actors, you know, on the show. It's just like there's a lot of different ways gay people have sex, and they don't all look like annoying, sceney LA people, you know. So, you know, I think that was like easily debunked or easily dealt with swiftly by the internet. And Jordan Firstman has already kind of like apologized for running his mouth, so I guess I forgive you, because I Love LA is also a really good show, and maybe we could talk about I Love LA next. But if you're watching the show, let me know who you most identify with. You know, this is our Sex in the City. You know, I'm such a Miranda or whatever. Am I Miranda? No, I'm a Samantha. I'm obviously a Samantha. And for Heated Rivalry, I kind of feel like I'm kind of like Shane Rising, but like Ilya Moon. You know? I don't know, like Ilya Rising.
Girl, you're Kip.
I'm Kip? Okay, I'm not down to be Kip. No, you know who's Kip? We have a friend. He's totally Kip. But, yeah, you don't know him, so it doesn't matter. But we all have a Kip in our lives. I do want to address the elephant in the room in terms of, like, Kip. It's like, he's, like, way too hot to be, like, some, like, art history smoothie person. But the more I think about it, it's just like, no, actually, some academics do be looking like that because they have nothing better to do than to go to the gym, you know? And, like, they do still feel kind of, like, mousy and small, even though they're, like, super jacked. Like, we know people like that. So, that's actually kind of real. I kind of, like, live for the representation of, like, the jacked regular guy with, like, you know, that works at a smoothie store. Anyways, I love the show. I could talk about it ad nauseum. Maybe we'll do a second video about this after the finale. Let me know if that's what you want. Like and subscribe. Tell your friends about this. I have to go perform at a Halloween at a Christmas show now. Well, if you think about it, Christmas is Halloween. This is Halloween. There's a movie about that. Okay. Bye.